The voicemail came just after 7 p.m. No name, just a clipped, professional voice. Miss Cross, your presence is required. Your father left you something. Something only you can access. I paused, the phone still in my hand. My father had been gone 5 years. We weren't close toward the end, but this didn't feel like some forgotten asset or old will. It felt urgent. I didn't overthink it. I packed my bag, locked up my apartment, and caught the last train to the city. The law firm was the kind you don't stumble into. Top floor, marble floors, walls lined with silent books and silent judgment. The receptionist didn't ask for my name. She just nodded and sent me down the hall. The lawyer, gray suit, gray hair, gray tone, was waiting. Miss Cross, thank you for coming. Your father left very specific instructions. He slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. On it, my name, handwritten. No seal, just a single bold word across the top, the Golden Trust. What is this? I asked. A financial trust, and more. Technically, you now control assets valued at over $80 million. I blinked, once, twice, but I didn't need time to be shocked. I needed clarity. Why me? The lawyer hesitated, just long enough to confirm this wasn't standard. He believed you'd know what to do with it, eventually. Then came the second envelope, smaller, sealed with wax, dark red. This, however, must not be opened until the upcoming cross-family gathering. His terms were explicit. I slipped both envelopes into my bag and stood to leave. One last thing, he added, his tone suddenly colder. Your Uncle Frank was not pleased. He expected to inherit everything. That made more sense than the money. Outside, the city pulsed around me, but all I could hear was the echo of that last line. Frank was not pleased. I walked fast, and before I got home, I backed up every file from my phone to a private server. Call it instinct. Something was starting. I didn't know what, but I knew I wouldn't be able to stop it once it did. The cross name had weight, and I'd spent years trying to outrun it. But now I was walking straight back into its shadow. The law firm had sent a car. Blacked out windows, leather seats, the kind of ride that doesn't ask questions. We passed through the business district in silence, the kind of silence that feels rehearsed. When I arrived at the estate, everything looked exactly the same. The columns, the fountain, the perfectly trimmed hedges. It was like time had frozen, only colder. Inside, the atmosphere shifted the second I stepped through the door. Landon, my half-brother, was already waiting. Same sharp jaw, same perfect posture, same blank expression. Beside him, Julia stood stiff, her polished smile more of a threat than a greeting. You came, she said, like it surprised her. I didn't respond. Their eyes scanned me like I was an intruder, not family. But that was the thing. I'd never been part of that version of the family. I was the one they never talked about at galas, the one who didn't belong. Frank entered last, impeccably dressed, calculating. The way he looked at me wasn't curiosity. It was assessment. You're here sooner than I expected, he said. That envelope must have said something interesting. I stayed quiet. Let him guess. The lawyer cleared his throat. We're not here for pleasantries. This is a formal reading. Let's begin. He detailed the trust again. Control, assets, restrictions. But my mind wasn't on the money. It was on the way Frank's jaw clenched every time my name was spoken. Something about this setup didn't feel like a gift. It felt like bait. And then came the real condition. I had 30 days to present the contents of the sealed envelope in front of the entire family. If I failed or refused, The trust defaulted to charity. That wasn't just legal, that was personal. As I left the room, Landon followed with a parting shot. Be careful what you open. Some doors don't close again. He was right. But some things, they need to be opened, no matter what crawls out. Back in my apartment, the city hummed beneath my window, cars passing, lights flickering, people living lives far simpler than mine had suddenly become. I placed the sealed envelope on the table, just stared at it. Thick, heavy, red wax seal, deep as blood. No return address, no label, just my name in my father's handwriting. Sharp, intentional, like every letter had been pressed with meaning. I didn't open it right away. I made tea I wouldn't drink. Let the silence stretch, because once I broke that seal, there'd be no undoing it. No pretending I didn't know what I was about to know. But pretending wasn't going to protect me anymore. I broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of thick paper, handwritten. No greetings, no explanations, just one line. Trust no one in that house, especially Frank. That was it. I read it again, slower. My father, who barely spoke in absolutes, had written that in ink, sealed it in wax, and told no one but me. A second note slipped from the folds. Smaller, torn at the edge, different handwriting. If you're reading this, the trust is more than money. It's a trail. Follow it, but carefully. What you'll find buried, it was never meant to stay hidden, but it was never meant to be safe either. I exhaled slowly, not out of shock, but because suddenly everything made more sense. The inheritance wasn't a reward, it was a test, and I wasn't picked to receive it. I was chosen to unravel it. Outside, thunder rolled low in the distance, like the city itself was bracing for impact. I tucked both notes back inside and locked them in my safe. If my father was right, I couldn't trust anyone in that house. And that meant the next 30 days weren't about claiming money. They were about staying alive long enough to uncover why I was given it in the first place. The funeral was cold, not just the weather, though the wind cut sharp through my coat, but the stairs, the silence, the unspoken tension that hovered like fog around the chapel steps. I stood at the edge of it all, not with the family, not with the mourners, somewhere in between, like I always had been. They arrived in black cars, tailored coats, designer sunglasses, grief performed in perfect choreography. And yet, I felt like the only one mourning anything real. Inside, the chapel glowed dimly with warm light, but it couldn't soften the edges of the people sitting in the front pew. Landon, stiff-backed, Julia, stoic, and Frank, unreadable. A face carved from politics and polished lies. No one acknowledged me at first. Then Julia turned, her smile slow and sharp. "You came," she whispered. "Brave of you. No welcome, no warmth, just warning." The priest began. Words about legacy, about honor, about a man whose life was complex, a quiet way to say complicated, but no one dared speak the truth. Not here, not yet. I kept my eyes on the casket, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't meet their stares. I knew they were watching me, waiting for me to flinch. After the service, the reception turned into something else. Champagne glasses, polite laughter, conversations that stopped when I got too close. And then Frank made his move. "You're making people nervous," he said, his tone flat, his expression calm. "That envelope, the trust, it wasn't meant for someone like you." I didn't rise to it. I just looked him in the eye. And yet, here I am. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Careful, Emily. The truth has a nasty way of burying the people who dig for it. Then he walked away, unbothered, unreadable. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. I felt like the threat. The reading took place in a boardroom that looked more like a courtroom. Wood-paneled walls, a long polished table, bottled water lined up like soldiers. It smelled like old money and fresh anxiety. Frank sat at the head, of course. Landon on his left, Julia to his right. I was at the far end, invited, not included. The attorney cleared his throat, formal, measured. As stipulated by Charles Cross's final directives, the entirety of the Cross estate, assets, holdings, and intellectual property, are to be placed in a single, controlling trust. Frank leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled, confident. But then came the line that cracked the room in half. That trust will be under the sole authority of Emily Cross. Silence. It didn't explode. It collapsed, like air sucked out of the room. Frank didn't speak. Not right away. But Julia did. "This must be a mistake," she said, her voice sharp, brittle. "She hasn't been involved in the company. She's been gone." The attorney adjusted his glasses. "There is no mistake. Mr. Cross made his wishes very clear. She alone has the power to activate or dissolve the trust within 30 days, pending one final requirement." He slid a smaller envelope across the table toward me, sealed in red wax. "She must open this, in front of the family, at the Cross estate, 30 days from today. Otherwise, the entire trust defaults to charity." Landon's jaw tightened. Frank's face was unreadable, but his fingers curled inward just slightly, pressure building beneath the surface. I reached for the envelope, held it without opening it. The wax felt warm, almost alive. "Why the delay?" I asked. The lawyer didn't answer, just looked me in the eye. He believed the truth needed the right time to surface. As I left the room, I could feel them watching me, trying to figure out whether I was a threat or just another pawn. But they were all missing the point. This time, I was holding the board. He didn't call first. Frank showed up at my door, like he owned the hallway outside my apartment. Like boundaries had never applied to him. He wore the same navy suit he always did when trying to look casual. No tie, top button open, but the watch on his wrist said power, not comfort. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, already stepping past me. He didn't wait for an answer. Of course he didn't. I closed the door, watched as he scanned the place. Modest, neat, real. Everything the Cross estate wasn't. "I won't waste your time," he started, voice smooth like bourbon poured over ice. "I know what that envelope says, or at least, what it could say." He sat on the edge of my couch, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a check. Blank. Signed. "You fill in the number. We both walk away from this with what we want." I stared at the paper, then at him. He looked calm, but his leg was bouncing, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. "You're scared of what's in that envelope," I said. He didn't flinch. "I'm aware of how this family works," he replied. "Secrets don't stay buried without cost. You're not ready for what it means to dig them up." There it was, not a threat. A warning dressed in silk. "I'm not for sale," I said, voice low. His smile cracked. "Everyone has a number, Emily. The real question is, how much will it cost to keep you quiet?" I walked to the door and opened it wide. "You should go before you say something you can't walk back." He stood, straightened his jacket, left the check on my counter like a business card. Before stepping out, he turned back once. "Think carefully. That trust might not just inherit wealth, it could inherit war. The door shut. The check stayed where it was. But in my chest, the fire was lit. And now I wasn't just curious, I was ready. The door clicked behind me. Silence. Not the usual kind. Not the quiet that comes after a long day. This one felt staged, like the room was holding its breath. I dropped my keys into the bowl and froze. The scent was off, slightly metallic, faint, but wrong. The air wasn't stale. It had been disturbed. I walked slowly, eyes scanning the floor. Nothing looked broken, nothing stolen, but someone had been here. I moved to my desk. The drawer I always locked, cracked open just a hair. Inside, the files I had tucked away, the backup drive, the duplicate notes from the law office, still there. But not quite in the same order. Then I saw it, a single sheet of paper, centered neatly on top of the stack. No header, no signature, just 3 words, typed in clean, bold font, walk away now. I stared at it for a long time, not shocked, not panicked, just still. This wasn't a message, it was a test. Whoever left it didn't want to scare me. They wanted to see what I'd do next. I didn't call the cops. What would I even say? Someone broke in and left everything intact but rearranged my paperwork and threatened me politely. This wasn't about theft. It was about pressure, control. A message only meant for people who understand the game. I pulled the curtain shut, checked every lock, and took the paper with me to the kitchen. Burned it over the stove, watched the flame curl up its edges like it was never meant to exist. Then I sat in the dark, back against the wall, the city glowing outside my window. I had 30 days, but now I wasn't counting down to a reveal. I was counting down to a collision. The old files were stored in a rusted metal box in the back of my father's study, buried beneath tax binders, receipts, years of clean paper trails. But I wasn't looking for what was clean. I was looking for what he hid. The envelope was unmarked. No date, just sealed tight, like whoever put it there never wanted it opened. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out a set of printed emails, stapled together. One name repeated at the top of every thread: Daniel Keeley, CPA. A name I didn't recognize. Not a family name, not a board member. Just a ghost accountant no one talked about. One line stood out, bolded in red ink: asset transfers processed under silent code. Directive: conceal beneficiary link to EC me. My pulse kicked up. The trust hadn't just been handed to me. It had been engineered, quietly, deliberately, across multiple shell companies and cutout entities. Dad hadn't just given me power. He'd protected it, hidden it from people he knew would come after it. I flipped to the last page, an internal memo addressed to Seacross. Sir, with the final reroute, the funds will be invisible to family holdings. Only your daughter can unlock it. If anything happens to me, the ledger copy is stored with the original safe passphrase, Garden-19. I sat back, hands cold. Keeley wasn't just the accountant, he was the firewall. And if someone knew I had this, it wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about covering tracks, erasing people, silencing paper trails. And if this memo was right, if that ledger still existed, it held the map to everything Frank didn't want found. I texted one word to myself. A reminder burned into my brain: Garden-19. Then I shredded every printed page and burned the shreds in the kitchen sink. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I knew exactly where to dig next. He showed up at my office, unannounced. No call, no warning, just a soft knock, And there he was, Frank, impeccable as always. Charcoal suit, coat folded neatly over his arm. The man could walk through fire and still have pressed cuffs. 5 minutes, he said, stepping inside before I could answer. That's all I need. I didn't offer him a seat. He looked around the room, scanning my bookshelves, the photo of Mom I kept on the corner of the desk. His eyes lingered on it for half a second, enough to register, not enough to feel. You've been digging, he said, voice low, casual. Old files, names that should have stayed forgotten. I leaned against the edge of my desk, arms crossed, and he gave a thin smile. You don't understand what you're walking into. No, I said. You don't understand that I'm not walking away. He sighed, like he pitied me, or maybe envied the luxury of my ignorance. Your father, he began, then stopped. He meant well, but he didn't know how this world works anymore. He built something clean and thought it would survive in the mud. He stepped closer, just a foot away now. His tone changed, warmer, but it felt like a velvet glove hiding a knife. I protected this family. You think the money just stayed safe on hope? You think we made it through 3 market crashes on clean hands? His eyes narrowed. Your father died still believing in honesty. Don't let that be your ending too. I didn't blink. I just looked at him. That ledger's not gone, I said quietly. And neither am I. His jaw tensed. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. A low, joyless sound. I hope you've backed up whatever you think you found, because if you haven't, well, mistakes like that tend to be permanent. And then he was gone. No threats, no yelling, just that cold, practiced calm that always came before storms. The storage unit wasn't fancy. Concrete walls, flickering overhead light, cold enough to see your breath if you stayed still too long. But this wasn't about comfort. It was about what my father had buried here. Unit 42. Same number he used for his office passcode back when I was a kid. I unlocked the door. The air inside smelled like dust and metal. Nothing looked remarkable. Old furniture, boxes, a few covered paintings. But tucked behind a filing cabinet was a small lockbox, bolted to the floor. The code was easy. Garden 19. Click. Inside, a single object. A sleek, black USB drive. No label, no markings. Just a fingerprint smudge on the edge, like someone had used it, then changed their mind. Back at my place, I plugged it in. My laptop paused. Screen flickered. Then, folders. Dozens. Shellcause _ 2020. Funshift. Trustcore _ backlog. Every file name was more incriminating than the last. I opened one marked emergency release and felt the blood drain from my face. Scans of ledger entries, bank routes, off-the-book payments traced back 10 years. Names I recognized, others I didn't. But the connections were clear. This wasn't just about hiding money. It was about orchestrating silence. Then I saw the final document, flagged in red. Priority. If anything happens to Charles Cross, release full archive to SEC plus named media outlets. Trigger. File labeled GATEFALL, Gatefall. I stared at that word. A digital failsafe. My father had prepared for his own downfall. He knew they'd come for him eventually. He knew someone inside the family would pull the trigger. And now I had the trigger in my hands. I copied everything, twice. One on a password-protected drive, the other to cloud storage under a fake name. Then I ejected the original. Burned it. No reason to leave fingerprints on the first matchstick. This wasn't a trust anymore. It was evidence, and I was done asking for permission. It was almost midnight, when someone knocked on my door. Not loud, not urgent, just consistent. I checked the peephole. William, still in his suit, but the tie was gone. And his face, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Or maybe he finally saw something he couldn't unsee. I opened the door without a word. He walked in like a man who'd already crossed a line. I wasn't followed, he said first, voice low. But we don't have long. I didn't ask what he meant. I just pointed to the couch. He didn't sit. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and handed it to me. This was in my dad's drawer, locked, hidden under a false bottom. I unfolded it. A payment order, dated 2 days before my father's accident. A mechanic's name, a 6-figure sum. The memo line read, "Consultation, brake system override." My stomach didn't drop. My chest didn't tighten. Not anymore. I'd run out of room for shock. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. He looked at me like the question hurt. Because I didn't know. I swear, I didn't. But now that I do... He trailed off. "You're not like them," he added. "You still have a line you won't cross. They don't." I folded the paper carefully. "Why now?" He hesitated. "Because last week I heard them talking. My name. Yours. Gatefall. They know you've found something. And if you push, if you go public, they'll burn everything, including you." He stepped back toward the door. "They've buried worse. You think you're the first one to try?" Then he left. I stood alone in the hallway, clutching the paper. I didn't need confirmation anymore. This wasn't about money. It was about legacy soaked in blood. And it was almost my turn to bleed. I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, because I was done waiting. At 3:12 a.m., I spread everything out across my kitchen table. Documents, emails, Keeley's ledger scan, the brake override receipt. A digital map of a cover-up so clean, it almost looked surgical. But now it had fingerprints, and I was going to make sure they stuck. I opened my laptop and created a new drive, encrypted, mirrored, backed up to a server with no name and no ties to me, just in case someone decided to get creative. Then I opened a blank document. Not a confession, a timeline. Who knew what, when they knew it, and what they did next. Not for drama, for evidence. I wrote it like a prosecutor prepping for court. No emotion, just facts sharp enough to cut skin. Next, I made a list of journalists, not just any, the ones who had burned billionaires before and lived to tell the story. People who weren't afraid of lawsuits or funerals. 3 names, 3 emails. I didn't send anything yet. This wasn't about speed, it was about impact. The Cross Family Annual Gala was in 7 days. Public, cameras, donors, media. The kind of event where reputations get minted or shattered. That's where I'd drop it. Gatefall. Right when the press cameras were rolling and no one could rewrite the script fast enough. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted, but clearer than I'd ever been. This wasn't revenge. It was exposure. The kind of truth that doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door off its hinges. And if they wanted to stop me, they'd have to do it in front of the whole damn city. The elevator ride to the 48th floor felt longer than usual. Not because of nerves, but because I could feel the pressure building above me like a ceiling about to collapse. The boardroom was already full when I walked in. Suits, perfume, power disguised as politeness. No one looked directly at me, except Frank. He smiled, a small rehearsed thing that didn't touch his eyes. "Nice of you to join us," he said. "We were just about to begin." I took my seat at the far end of the table, the same spot my father once sat, years ago, when this place still felt unlike his. The lead counsel cleared her throat and opened the folder. Today's agenda will include Q3 financials, transitions regarding the trust, and the formal introduction of the new beneficiary. Eyes turned. Subtle, calculated. They wanted to see how I'd carry the name, the weight, the fire. I didn't flinch. Before we begin, I said, standing slowly, there's something I need to present. It concerns the trust and the real reason my father created it. I placed the drive on the table. The room went quiet, too quiet. What you're about to see isn't just a family matter. It's a corporate liability. And if you care about your seats at this table, you'll want to understand what you've signed up for. I looked at Frank, still smiling, but the twitch in his temple. That wasn't part of the act. I plugged in the drive. The screen lit up. Folders, numbers, transfers, redacted names. Then, photos, scans, handwritten notes. One of them in my father's handwriting. If you're reading this, I failed to stop them. But maybe she won't. That's when the shouting began. Hands slammed on tables. Voices cracked. Shareholders whispering. Some stood, some left. And through it all, Frank didn't say a word. He just watched me, like he finally understood. I wasn't there to inherit his world. I was there to end it. It happened so fast, you'd think it was rehearsed. Maybe it was. The boardroom hadn't even cleared when the doors opened again. Only this time, it wasn't another shareholder or a late arrival. It was two agents in black, suits plain, faces blank, and behind them, a woman with a badge and a voice like ice. Franklin Cross? He stood slowly, calm, too calm. That's me. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and suspicion of murder. You could hear the click of the cuffs from across the room. And still, he didn't speak. No denial, no outrage. Just that same smile. Like this was all part of some final poker hand. Would you look at that? He said softly. Glancing toward me, she really did it. No one moved. Not the board, not the lawyers, not the press rep frozen in the corner. Just the agents stepping forward, reading him his rights like they'd done it 1,000 times. Because they had. This time, he wasn't the exception. As they led him away, someone tried to speak. Landon, maybe, or one of the junior partners. But the words fell flat. Power had left the room, and all that was left was silence. And me, still standing, still steady. I looked down at the chair he'd been sitting in moments ago. Still warm, still stained with the belief that he couldn't be touched. Outside, I heard the click of cameras. Somewhere, a reporter was breaking the story. The Cross Empire wasn't falling, it was burning. And I wasn't watching it happen from the sidelines anymore. I was the one who lit the match. After the arrest, the building emptied like someone had pulled the plug. Corridors that once echoed with polished shoes and fake laughter now felt hollow. Lights flickered overhead. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it exposes. I walked back into the boardroom alone. The chair he'd occupied still sat slightly pushed back, like he might return. But he wouldn't. The drive was still on the table, disconnected. Useless now that the truth had done its damage. And me? I just stood there, not victorious, not relieved, just still. There's this part no one talks about. The moment after the storm, when all the noise fades and you realize the truth changes things, but it doesn't clean them up. I had the keys now. Every account, every vote, every title once attached to a man in cuffs now belonged to me, but so did the blood under it, The cross name had always stood for power. Now, it stood for exposure, for reckoning. I could rebuild it, rebrand it, wash it clean, or burn it to the ground completely. 2 folders sat in front of me. One was the transition binder, new leadership, PR damage control, staff reshuffling. The machine could run if I let it. The other, the shutdown protocol, a plan my father drafted years ago, a full dissolution, sell off assets, protect employees, shut the doors, quietly, decisively. It wasn't just a company anymore. It was a weapon, and I had to decide if I wanted to use it or dismantle it. No one was left to tell me what to do. But I remembered what my father said once, late one night, back when I was still too young to understand. Truth without courage is just information, but truth with action, that's legacy. So I sat down and chose. The garden hadn't changed. Same crooked stone path, same stubborn rose bush by the fence that refused to bloom all winter. Same scent, earthy, raw, honest. I hadn't been back here since the day he died, but tonight I needed quiet that didn't echo. I knelt by the soil, cold, damp, real. For weeks, everything had been sharp. Numbers, files, accusations, arrests. Every conversation felt like a chess match, every decision a weapon. But here, nothing demanded answers. I ran my fingers through the dirt, let it settle into my skin. No gloves, no walls, just me. And memory. He used to say the garden was the only place people stopped pretending. Plants didn't bluff. They either lived or they didn't. I found the rose bush he once called the stubborn one, the one Mom planted before everything went dark. It hadn't bloomed in years. Until now. A single bloom. Perfect, quiet, defiant. I smiled. Not because everything was fine. It wasn't. But because sometimes surviving was the story. The company would go on, rebuilt, smaller, cleaner. Not in his name, in mine. The Cross Empire was over, but something else could grow in its place. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the wax seal, broken but still intact enough to recognize. I buried it beneath the rose, not for closure, but because the past didn't need a shelf. It needed soil, something to feed the next thing. The wind picked up, leaves shifted, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking forward. So that's how it ended, not with a headline, not with revenge, but with a choice. You know, people always say they'd do the right thing if given the chance, that they'd stand up, speak out, walk through fire if they had to. But when it's your name on the check, when the secrets belong to people you used to love, when the damage doesn't just break walls, it breaks blood, would you still? Would you still open that envelope? Would you still press send on the truth, knowing it'll tear through everything you thought was home? Or would you walk away quietly? Let sleeping lies stay buried. Tell yourself it's not your fight, that it's safer to survive than to stand. Me, I didn't get to wonder. The truth showed up. And once it did, I had 2 choices. Let it rot or let it burn. I chose the latter, but now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. What would you have done? Would you expose your own family if it meant losing the only version of them you ever knew? Would you risk everything just to do what's right? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, share it.